Vaccination policies have changed drastically since the early 20th century, when they were primarily emergency medical interventions for whole populations in times of smallpox outbreaks, to the policies of today, when they primarily target infants and young children for non-emergency prevention of many diseases of varying severity. Legislatures and courts have had to grapple with many issues flowing from these policies, including vaccine injury compensation, religious exemptions, philosophical exemptions, the right to education, the right to informed consent, and the right to parental decision-making. I provide a few examples of court decisions related to vaccination from courts in different countries. In Japan, in 1992, the Tokyo High Court heard a case from 159 survivors of vaccine-induced injury or death. The court concluded that the Ministry of Health had been negligent in failing to establish a screening program to exclude people with contraindications to vaccination. The court noted that the Ministry of Health had focused on measures to raise vaccination rates at the expense of attention to vaccine adverse reactions. Furthermore, the court noted that the ministry had not provided sufficient information about vaccine adverse events to doctors and the public. The court concluded that the injured victims were entitled to compensation as a matter of state policy. In Ukraine, in 2004, its constitutional court interpreted the Constitution to guarantee the right of education on the principle of equality, and it found that every child was entitled to a school-based education, regardless of their vaccination status. The Turkish Constitutional Court in 2015 upheld the principle of parental consent and that it was necessary for the vaccination of children and infants. It found that despite the Ministry of Health's assurance that childhood vaccinations are in the best interest of the child, the infant's interest in bodily integrity may only be violated for medical necessity and based on law, and that was not the case for routine vaccinations. On the other hand, in January 2015, a judgment of the Czech Constitutional Court upheld a public health law prohibiting young children from attending preschool, without vaccinations against 9 diseases unless the children had permanent contraindications. But the judgment was over a stinging dissent, arguing that the court's decision was more politically motivated than based on a rigorous constitutional analysis. The dissent found that the majority's decision had turned a blind eye to the unconstitutionality of the law, and that the court's decision would ultimately undermine rather than advance the legitimacy of vaccination mandates. In the United States, the legitimacy of school vaccination mandates came into sharp focus last year when almost 20 states introduced legislation to limit or prohibit altogether exemptions from vaccination except for very limited medical ones. Only in the state of California did blanket legislation pass, which prohibits all exemptions save limited medical ones, although similar laws already exist in 2 other states, Mississippi and West Virginia, to that effect. We are likely to see in the near future whether California courts will uphold or reject this new law, which directly contradicts the California Constitution's guarantee of a right to a public education for all children. We will see whether courts are prepared to endorse a new kind of school segregation against 225,000 children whose vaccination statuses do not conform perfectly to California's dictates. With over 270 vaccines in the global research and development pipeline, the role of law and courts in upholding or rejecting vaccination mandates and in compensating the victims of vaccine injury is critical. As we all understand, healthcare is a big business the world over, and vaccines represent a growing medical market with increasingly high profit margins. If we don't adhere to first principles of the rights to life, liberty, and bodily integrity of the individual, and the right to prior, free, and informed consent in medicine, we may find ourselves with both known and unknown harms. To conclude, I paraphrase President Eisenhower's farewell address to the United States in 1961 when he was addressing the benefits and risks posed by the military-industrial complex. I substitute the term medical-industrial complex, which I believe today poses many of the same benefits and risks. He foretold the potential of the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this complex endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and medical machinery of health with our methods and goals so that security and liberty may prosper together. In holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific technological elite. So let us be alert, knowledgeable, and properly integrate the interests of global health security and global liberty. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Holland. I don't have to say anything. You have a standing ovation, and I have a bunch of questions for you. Our concluding